Hello everyone, welcome to today's class, and our title today is ESL Error. Let's move on to language focus. 1번. Nobody even bothered to talk to Jennifer's parents about this. Okay, so we're going to look at the phrase bother to. Now we use bother to with a verb to express that an action involves some effort or difficulty. It is often used in a negative to imply that inadequate effort was made. Example. Well, surely there's a word that we use with bother, and that's 귀찮다, a lot. But it's not exactly matched with all of the meanings of bother. Okay? So it says that it's often used with a negative to imply that inadequate effort, so 부족한 effort was made. So if we look at the example sentence, the doctor didn't bother to check carefully, so the patient didn't get the treatment he needed. So 의사는 굳이 자세히 확인하지 않아서 환자가 필요한 치료를 받지 못했다. So he 열심히 확인하지 않았어요. Just 대충 확인했어요. He didn't bother to check carefully. So this patient didn't get the treatment that he needed. Maybe the doctor was like, 다음 사람은 귀찮아서 나 그냥 빨리 대충 확인하고 집에 갈 거야, 퇴근할 거야. 이런 마음이 더 있을 수도 있었어요. 근데 we use bother to check. Or nobody bothered to tell me that the meeting was cancelled. 아무도 나에게 회의가 취소됐다고 말하지 않았다. If I say nobody told me that the meeting was cancelled, it has a very similar meaning. 근데 nobody bothered to tell me, 이런 경우에는 내 기분 조금 짜증나요. 아니면 다른 직원들은 저에게 해외가 취소했다고 했어요. 그래서 내 기분 좀 짜증나요. So bother to. Alright, let's move on to 2번. But there are concerns that other students in ESL programs are treated as if they're not smart enough. Remember the last lesson we looked at not enough? With many dropping out of high school or just barely graduating. Just barely. Now we used just barely to imply that something almost didn't happen. Or something minimum requirement was almost not met. All right. So let me show you in this. Just barely. 거의 안 했다. So, I just barely avoided crashing my car because of the bad weather. 나는 악전후 때문에 차 충돌을 간신히 피할 수 있었다. 날씨가 너무 안 좋으니까 거의 사고 뻔했어요. So, I didn't crash my car. 근데 거의 사고 뻔했어요. So, it didn't happen, but it almost happened because of the bad weather. 안 좋은 날씨 때문에. Marcel just barely made it to work on time. 그리고 마셀은 겨우 제 시간에 출근했어요. 지각하지 않은데 그는 거의 지각했어요. 할 뻔했어요. So he just made it. 예를 들어서 출근 시간은 8시까지 도착해야 합니다. 근데 마셀은 7시 59분 도착했습니다. So he just barely made it to work on time. Now, let's look at the language focus quiz. 1번. Got in trouble because they didn't bother to... So, didn't bother to check, didn't bother to tell. So remember, nobody bothered to tell me that the meeting was cancelled. 아무도 나에게 회의가 취소되었다고 말하지 않았다. So, got in trouble because they didn't bother to. Let's say the football team. Oops. The team got in trouble because nobody bothered to, let's say, practice hard. Alright. So, 그 팀은 굳이 열심히 연습하지 않아서 곤란에 처했다. Alright. So, because they didn't practice, they may have lost the game. 2번. Nobody bothered to tell me. Didn't bother to. Let me just highlight that again. That. Nobody bothered to tell me that. Let's keep it very simple. The party was cancelled. So, 아무도 파티가 취소되었다고 내게 일부러 말하지 않았다. So, no one told me. They could have told me, but no one told me. 3번. Just barely. Before it was too late. Just barely. 거의 안 했다. Marcel just barely made it to work on time. Marcel은 경우 제 시간에 출근했어요. So let's say she just barely submitted her assignment before it was too late. 그녀는 너무 늦기 전에 경유 과제를 제출했어요. So she just made the deadline. 4번. Just barely avoided. Let's say I just barely avoided my ex. So 나는 전 여자친구와 마주치는 곳을 간신히 피했다. So meaning I may have seen her from afar, but I 피했어요. I avoided her. Now let's look at the further discussion. 1번. Do you think it's true that ESL students drop out or just barely graduate more frequently than other students? If so, is the school's fault? Why or why not? 여러분은 ESL 학생들이 다른 학생들보다 더 자주 자퇴하거나 거의 졸업하지 못한다는 것이 사실이라고 생각하나요? 그렇다면 이것은 학교들의 잘못인가요? 왜일까요? 아니면 왜 아닐까요? I think it would be obviously more difficult for ESL students to graduate or continue classes because usually ESL students go to another country that doesn't speak their language fluently. So, example, Koreans will go to America or Koreans will go to Australia, English-speaking countries. And if they don't speak English very well, of course it's going to be much more difficult, especially when it is in regards to schoolwork. If it's conversation, usually people have more fun and are less likely to drop out. But if you have to study something which requires reading, writing, and comprehending, it's obviously much more difficult. 2번. If you're a parent moving to the US with your children, would you want them to be placed in an ESL class or would you ask them to be mainstreamed, meaning they would be put into a regular non-ESL class? 만약에 당신이 당신의 아이들과 함께 미국으로 이사를 가는 부모라면 당신은 그들이 ESL 수업에 배치되기를 원하나요? 아니면 당신은 그들이 추루루 이루도록 요구할 것인가요? ESL classes still are better for people to adapt into. But it would just depend on how old my children were. Let's say they were much older and let's say English wasn't great. I'd have to put them in an ESL class as a first step. But it's still would be still very difficult for them. All right? So it would just depend on the age, in my opinion. And that's my reason, because obviously I think about that as well for my daughter. What am I going to do? Do I take her to Australia? Do I take her to an international school? Who knows? Anyway, that was today's class, and I'll see you on the next class.
A different ball game.
A different ball game.
Ethnicity.
Ethnicity.
Next to nothing.
Next to nothing.
Get back on track.
Get back on track.
Drop out.
Drop out.
Address.
Address.